Thank you. All right, welcome everybody to our Planning Commission meeting this evening. Let's go ahead and get started with a Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all please stand and join with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. First of all, we're going to excuse Commissioners Kerr, Wright, and Shagrud, who are out for various reasons, and kind of accordingly or along with that, we're just going to forego our normal thought prayer because I won't tell you who, but anyway, they're not here. So let's go ahead and move along to the first item on our agenda, which is a parking modification. I don't know, Corey, if you wanted to take 1 and 2 at the same time so we can knock them both out?
That's entirely up to you.
Well, we've already seen number 2, so that's coming back to us, and it's
Okay.
heavily related to number 1, so.
Yes, it is. I need to excuse Whitney. She is on her promised vacation that we allotted her when we brought her on board, so she's enjoying the Caribbean Sea right now, and I'll cover these 2 items that she was in charge of. So hopefully I know most of the things, but there might be some details I have to look up. But as you're aware, the second item was on your last commission agenda. This was a conditional use to add a use to a site in the industrial zone on the west side of our city. It is a mixed tenant site, and so there was some discussions. Primarily, most of the discussion was how does parking work when you're adding a use that's different than what was approved in the original site plan. And part of that discussion is maybe seeking a parking modification request because the demand the applicant represented may not be what's our code allowance. So there was encouragement to go back and take a look at the parking modification. You see the submittal to you is really, there's different levels of, not levels, but different ways to make a parking modification depending on shared parking, independent parking study. So there's a lot of different ways to look. I think there's 4 different ways to look at getting a parking study. I believe the applicant addressed more of a shared use scenario in the application because they have other tenant areas that are not necessarily using the demand for the parking, and so the applicant provided you more of a shared parking scenario. Staff looked at it, and you certainly could choose the shared parking allowance, but our view of it is just go with the allowance under the commercial use zone that you can modify the parking based on what is going on. So you have broad discretion under that scenario, and you have a choice. You could look at the situation. You could also ask for a parking study. So there's a number of ways also to address that, and you can simply modify the commercial demand. And that's kind of what we relied on as staff. When you look at the unique application, due to the hobby nature of the second item that the applicant's doing is selling cars, I don't remember all the fine rules, but you can only sell so many cars within a year or 2. And if you sell more than that, then you have to register as a dealer. The applicant is really doing this as I think it was represented as a hobby business. It's not they're not opening up a dealership per se, but they have to get a dealership license. They have to have 3 minimum stalls, and they have to post their dealer sign at a location. So that's the state laws to be a dealer. As you recall, the parking is not for the display vehicles, not happening exterior. It's happening interior to the flex use warehouse space where he'll have a couple of vehicles available as he rotates through selling some vehicles. So it came down to the patron customer parking. His view is it's a limited business. Me and by appointment, we'll bring folks in. And so our minimum 4 is what we require, which is a little bit different than the state minimum of 3 for the display. So the question is he has 3 stalls by rights of how the tenant spaces work. The question is the fourth stall needed? So we looked at it from just modifying it. If the applicant's willing to keep that narrow business model that was submitted, then the need for additional parking doesn't seem to be warranted. And so allowing him just to say, okay, you've got 3, and you're doing appointment-based, so if you'll live within those parameters, we can waive the 1 additional 4 minimum stall requirement. Which leads you back to the conditional use part, if you want to add that in. We've called out that narrow limitation. So we're giving a modification of 3, from going from 4 to 3, and that it will be what the applicant submitted, appointment-based, cars displayed on inside. We addressed briefly a transport system, just not doing it from the public roadway. He doesn't do a massive inventory of cars anyway. And so we just felt like between the limited nature of the business and the request for parking, just allow him to go to 3 instead of the required 4. So we're recommending approval of the parking change to 3, and we're now recommending approval of the conditional use on those limitations that the applicant mentioned, how they're going to conduct business.
Great. Thanks, Corey. So just looking ahead here a little bit, in the suggested motion that you've got in the staff report
For parking or for the?
for the parking,
Okay.
for the parking modification, does it, am I missing it somewhere? Never mind, it does. Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Corey?
No, he pretty much summed it up.
So, again, I'm proposing that we discuss the parking modification and finishing up the CUP at the same time, since we talked about the CUP at length last time, and it was contingent upon the parking modification. So, if anybody has any objections to that, let me know.
It's okay.
Great. Okay, if we don't have any other questions for Corey, then we will open it up to the applicant to go ahead and address us and discuss any of the items. Anything from the parking modification of note?
No, Corey took all my good talking points, so I don't have anything to add, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
No, I do think it's, honestly, this one kind of turns out the way that I thought it would, with very few cars in the parking lot at all throughout the day.
Yes, I have been counting since we last met, and I think the max I saw was 4 out of the 14 spots on my side of the building. So there's been at least 10 spots open at any given time that I've observed it.
I enjoyed actually seeing your tracking of the cars.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if people were like, why does this guy keep coming out here with like a little marker? Is he like, okay.
Wow. Also, he's only in the office 4 days a week. So it's documented. All right, anybody else have any other questions for the applicant? No? Okay, that makes it easy. So for parking modifications, parking modifications are not required to have a public hearing, and we closed the public hearing at the previous meeting when we talked about the conditional use permit. So there is no requirement for a public hearing on this case. Any further discussion about this item? All right, anybody like to make a motion relating to parking modifications?
I will. I hereby motion for the planning commission to grant a parking modification for Clubhouse Motor Company located 71 North 1400 West with the following conditions. This modification is only for Clubhouse Motor Company, is not transferable to another location or another user at this location. This modification amends the required parking spaces for this use of this specific location from 4 to 3. This modification is contingent on the approval of a subsequent conditional use permit.
And you can just suggest reasons for action, A through C.
Suggestions A through C.
Yeah,
I'll second.
perfect, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to the motion? All right, let's start on this end.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, that motion passes. And then on to the conditional use permit. Anybody want to make a motion on that one?
I can find it. Oh, right there. Okay. I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to approve a conditional use permit for Clubhouse Mortar Company located at 71 North, 1400 West with the following conditions.
Flip it over.
1 through 8, and suggested reasons for actions A through D.
A second.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to the conditional use permit motion? Nope. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye? Aye. Great. That motion passes as well. Thank you. All right. We will move along then to the next item on our agenda. This one is one that we've also talked about before. This is a final site plan amendment submittal for the Hive development at 555 North, 400 West. This one as well is just a public meeting and not a public hearing, as it is a final site plan. We do our public meetings, our public hearings, geez, I keep getting that messed up. We get our public hearings at the conditional, or the conceptual site plan stage, and not the final site plan stage. Just as a reminder to everybody, I think I brought that up the last time at the last meeting as well, just as a reminder as well. So, Corey, we'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Chair Daley, and members of the commission. You're fairly well-versed in this project. It's come to you a couple of times through a tabling, and we held some hearings on it. The request is just the section of the ordinance that allows an opportunity for a property owner to ask the commission to increase the standard fence height, which is limited to 6 feet, and there's a couple of terms of measurement, how 6 feet are measured from flat versus grade. But the 6-foot fence is the cap unless approval is granted by the planning commission. The genesis for an approval is not directed from the city, it's directed from the applicant. The applicant can request it, but it's not a given that the planning commission will accept it. And the planning commission will review that request, and if they find that there is a cause that benefits the area as well as keeping the city, in whole, intact in its ordinances, you can allow up to a 10-foot fence, which is quite tall. As you're well, there was original to do a partial fence down the single-family lots of the project. There was a discussion that ensued. The tabling occurred for them to go back and look at two items, account for the drainage for the project, because there's a drainage plan along that fence line, which was originally just a surface swell, and whether they could consider extending the taller fence on the entire north property line instead of just the single family. And then there was some discussion about how that fence would be implemented with different grade changes, because there's a fall from 400 West to frontage road. So what you have, and it was discussed at your last meeting, and now you have the more formal plans for the fence. They'll use a retaining wall system. It'll run 1 to 3 feet in height to retain the backyard grades that have not been finalized yet. And then they will place the 6-foot fence on top of that retaining wall. So your fence height will potentially vary from 7 feet to 9 feet. And it'll cover that entire property line. Staff does point out, we carried it over for the last public meeting, when you hit the front setback on 400 West, it needs to drop to the 4 feet. And we talked about that during the conceptual review process. Now we're extending the fence, the entire north property line, to the frontage road. And the frontage road has a front yard setback too. And so now we have the requirement to do your fencing with retaining until you hit those setback, and then it needs to drop to the 4-foot height. So that's something that staff calls out in addition to the 400 West. Now we call out the frontage road. So that's a little bit of a change from what you've seen at the last meeting. The drainage plan is changing from a surface swale to a pipe system. That pipe system will run from 400 West to roughly the lot line between the second and the third home on the western side. It will connect in, cross the road, and head into the detention. The last two homes will be a surface drainage that runs into the detention area just to the west of that second home. And so that's the drainage plan. You asked to have it looked back by the city engineer and the building official. I took the plans to both. The building officials looked at the engineering and says, yeah, now we'll just need to get a building permit to finalize the fencing program, but the design was acceptable. City engineer reviewed it, call it out in your report that the design is acceptable, including the drainage plan that is being proposed. And so at this point, it's at your discretion of whether you want to allow that taller fence. As I recall, the public seemingly had a general support for the fence, but that's not the base of your criteria. Certainly, it's part of considering whether this has a good cause, a public, cause to it, but it's not a decision whether the public wants it or dislikes it. Obviously, this has some advantage that they see in general positive. And the drainage plan, our drainage and utility engineer, our manager, Cameron Woodbury, along with the engineer, says, I prefer the piped one because lot owners can change the surface in the back and we'd catch it far down the road. So he prefers the pipe system. So seemingly is coming together that there is a reasonable cause to allow the higher fence, but it is at your discretion.
Thanks, Corey. Does anybody have any questions for Corey on this one? Real quickly, Corey, on page 2 of the staff report, the recommended motion talks about approving the conceptual site plan, but that should be final
Final.
site plan?
That's a miss marked by me.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, I'm typing conceptual and final in so many reports that I don't know which one I'm typing.
Yeah, that's okay. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing.
Good catch, it's a final.
Yeah, all right. And then, yeah, I mean, just kind of as a reminder here, I think we're really reviewing this one to make sure that this final site plan is substantially similar to what we saw in the conceptual site plan. And making sure that it kind of follows along with what we had talked about before, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right, any other questions before we turn the time over to the applicant? You can address the final site plan or anything else that you'd like to talk about or anything else that is
Just one clarification.
pertinent. Yeah, go ahead.
When we talk about 10-foot fence, we're talking about 10 foot from the low side to the top. So it'd be a combination of, say, a 4-foot retaining wall with a 6-foot fence on it. That's your 10 feet.
Yeah, if you hit different grades, then you measure the mid-mark of the grade. So, yeah, you're,
Measured from the low
And
side.
it's from the low side?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank
Thank you.
you'll
Go ahead.
always have a taller fence on the low side than the
Sure.
high side.
Yeah. Go ahead and
Walker
introduce
Wood.
yourself.
Yes, Walker Wood here representing the applicant. We haven't made any changes to the plans you're seeing. We have talked to the engineer and Corey's talked to the building official. I've only talked to the engineer, but what you've seen is the same that we had submitted prior. So we haven't made any modifications from that previous submittal. I think it's, unless you have questions, no, I don't have anything to add.
No, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, as you've demonstrated, whether it was you or Darlene in the past, just, continue to work with the neighbors, be good neighbors, especially since you guys are going to occupy the building there. So just encourage you to continue to do what you've done in the past and be good neighbors.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of the only thing I have to say. Any other questions for the applicant?
Thanks for all your working with them and all that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, as I mentioned, we have, this one is not as public hearing, just a public meeting, as we have had our lengthy discussions about this one in the past. So, any further discussion about this particular issue? Any further questions for staff? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on this
Covered
one?
it pretty well last time.
Yeah.
This one right here.
Yep. Make sure you say final, not conceptual.
And then do I have to read out all
You
four?
you don't have to read them in word for word, you can just say, condition, following condition, or as follows, 1 through 4 in the staff report.
Okay. I hereby motion for the planning commission to approve the final site plan requesting an increased fence height for the Hive development as follows, numbers 1 through 4 of the staff report. And suggested reasons for actions A through D.
Second.
Great, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this motion? All right, then we'll go ahead and vote on this motion. Right here, right? Aye.
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 Thank you, that motion passes. All right, thank you, everybody. And we are on a roll. Let's move along to the fourth item on our agenda, which follows our theme of parking modifications. This is for a parking modification at 380 South Main Street, and turn the time over to Corey.
Thank you, Chair Daly and members of the commission. Yes, this is an interesting one. You've not seen it before, so you are welcome to query until your heart's content. It's your time at the meeting you're spending, just so you know. But query to my heart content on what's happening here. So we're looking at 380 South Main Street. If you're familiar, it's the Cook family home. The petitioner is related to the family, and the petitioner's family, they have an employment as a podiatrist, if I get it right, if I'm pronouncing it right. Podiatrist who wishes to somewhat make a foray into Centerville on a I guess, a limited basis, and has a small operation at the old family home there. And currently, they've been approved for a license there. They're approved right now as an office use because the current operation of the podiatry is to do some in-home patient care, so they're not bringing patients to the facility. And there are two other office users. One is the Cook Rentals, that's a part of the family business, and Global Security. I don't know the links, but they have a small office in the Cook building too. So you have those two office uses. There's three right now, but the idea of the parking modification is if there's an opportunity to do some patient care at the facility, then that changes the nature of the parking counts, because the podiatry is a minimum of 8 stalls. So you're just assuming that you got a medical office and it's this much, one per 175 square feet of office. So if you have a really big place, you're going to be putting a lot of parking. If you have a really small place, 8 stalls minimum. And if you look at the site plan, there's only 7 striped. There is some extra asphalt. That's the discussion that we've had, is what if I stripe a couple of more stalls? But it's this whole issue that we have the other tenant users too of office space. And so it came down to, we're increasing in some sense the intensity that's happening by looking at the uses. But we're back to kind of the clubhouse motor that you just talked about. The limited operations change the nature of it, and it's not just a full-fledged medical office that's operating there. But then how do we account for the office uses? So you see in the calculation is if we just looked at it blank today, what was it, 17 stalls required, given the 2 office uses, and then the 8.5 when we round up to the nearest whole. So we're somewhere around 17 stalls, and we don't have 17 stalls. We have 7 with maybe 2 more, 2.5 more striped the area. So it doesn't meet our code. But we're back to, again, the clubhouse motor. What is Cook Facilities approved uses? Well, it's been for a number of years, and this is what it comes down to. I don't have a final site plan for the Cook Builders, partially because it was a home for many years when it was constructed, so that isn't, there's no records for that. We do have licenses from before my tenure here for Cook Builders. So that's a contractor sales and service, which has a parking count, and then you look at storage areas. And so if you look at what Cook Builders was using, it was using a site from a long past where you had some patron parking, and then you had large gravel areas for equipment and employee and additional parking. And so in essence, the site has sufficient area for parking, The question is demanding the requirement to meet all the 17. And this is where I think you'll hear the applicant give you their spiel. But it comes down to that there are greater plans with the property. So rather than try to invest a bunch of money in infrastructure now, there is a hopeful change in the somewhat long recent future. Is that right to say it that way, Jeff? The long recent future, that they would redevelop the site. And so going through the process to amend, add more drainage, and when the site can accommodate using the non-conforming gravel area if need be for parking, and you do a limited nature of the podiatry, the limited nature of the 2 offices. The question is can they function in that parking, and would the commission entertain that situation as a parking modification rather than formalizing more asphalt, more stormwater management, more investment in infrastructure? So that's why they're coming to you. They may end up just, if it's again your discretion, they could do it on a limited basis based on the 3 office uses to extent, but they would like an opportunity to bring patients in. I think the application said no more than 3 per hour, I think is what it said, no more than 3 per hour. So the question for the commission is would you grant in the non-conforming layout of the site that would have sufficient area for parking, but is not necessarily formalized as parking? Would you grant a parking waiver?
So when you say not formalized, not striped?
Not asphalt or concrete? Yeah, so it's not striped too, but it's asphalt and concrete is the current code that your parking lots are constructed with asphalt and concrete.
Is it gravel?
Is gravel. And that's where all your contractor trucks and
Yeah.
equipment was stored for a long number of years.
Corey, I recognize this is a unique situation, and I see, I'm looking at the aerial view of the thing. I see the striped parking on the south side, and then the gravel on the west and north. By granting a parking modification like this, are there any, fire access or considerations that need to be given, or?
I don't believe so, because the use for the office and contractor sales and services there, all the fire apparatus, the building's close enough to park the apparatus on the streets for firefighting, so there's no need to drive onto the site to get to incident. So I don't see any fire. I mean, we could certainly query of that, but
Yeah, no, that's fine. You're right. I mean, yeah. It makes sense. They wouldn't probably want to pull onto the site anyway.
right.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions for Corey? Okay. Let's go ahead and invite the applicant to come forward and speak to this issue, discuss any of the items that Corey mentioned, or anything else you'd like to talk about. Anything else that you'd like us to know?
Just
Could you
that.
just introduce yourself?
Hi, y'all. So, my name's Kelly Payne. I'm a cook. This is my dad, Jeff Cook. My husband is Dr. Nathan Payne. We're trying to get a podiatry practice going. We want to be in Centerville. That's where we want to base everything out of. I own a medical billing business, which kind of inspired this whole thing. I've seen success with this exact same program in California. But basically, the majority of his visits will be in home with patients. That's how we're going to base the care, based off the other elderly population and things like that. And podiatry, I mean, it is for everyone, but typically the patients are older. Not everybody wants to be seen in the home, so we would like the option to see them in the office. He currently owns a practice in Northern California and has been practicing similar to this. He does not have a medical assistant. He has a girl that runs his front desk, but you're looking at that one. And so it will be that, or we will have people working for us virtually. So he will be rooming the patient. He will, be with the patient the whole time. That is not going to change. The way we know how we want to practice medicine is very hands-on. Even now, he walks the patient in, walks them to the room, walks them out. That's not going to change. So as far as like staffing needs and things like that, we will not be growing that way. That's just not the way we want to do it. And again, inpatient home. With regards to the other two offices, Cook Rentals is Grandpa's business. Operation hours are 9 to 12. Everything is pretty much done in the mail. You'll have maybe 1 or 2 clients a week come and drop off a check and then leave. Global Security is Uncle John. I don't even know if you'll see a client come once a week. He literally takes phone calls and then they go to medical. They go to people's homes as well. So you're dealing with 3 family businesses that really are based outside but have office locations there. And that's really it. The most he sees right now is 3 patients an hour. And with how he likes to treat patients and how he likes to do things in an office setting, there is absolutely no way he will see more than 3 patients an hour. So with the 7 parking spaces that are lined, the 2 that will, wink, wink, nod, nod, because it is asphalted, there's additional parking off to the side, and then, like I said, all the way around. Cook Builders historically had 20 or 30 people for their business alone with cars there going in and out, and there's never been a parking complaint. Vote for me. Do any of you guys have any questions?
Do you have any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll start on this one. I think this one is, like I mentioned before, a unique situation. The property is unique. It's different than what we've seen, certainly on the west side and stuff, west of the freeway and whatnot. But to me, it does appear like there's plenty of parking available. It's just a matter of formalizing or not formalizing. And I don't personally have concerns with whether or not, we're going to be spilling out onto the street or anything like that. I don't see that as a likely scenario. So, any other thoughts or comments from anybody?
Yeah, I think the primary concern is that whatever parking does, are involved with this property is contained on the property, not spilling on the streets. And as long as there's plenty of space, I think that'll be achieved. If some of it's vehicle storage, that's pretty manageable, I think.
All right. Anybody else? You don't have to. Okay, perfect. Anybody have a motion pulled up?
Yeah,
Christina?
I do. Says I hereby make a motion of the Planning Commission to approve proposed parking modifications as follows, 1 through 7, and suggested reasons for action and finding A through C.
Second?
I'll second that.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to the motion? Okay, we will start on that end.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye? Aye. Great. That motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Really appreciate it. You guys have no idea how much.
No problem. Happy to have,
Builders, just to say, we moved to our new building, over, have you guys seen it, over on the west side by Salmon's kind of,
okay, yeah,
been really nice.
good.
Okay.
All right, let's,
Thank you.
thank you. Let's move along then to the next item on our agenda, Community Development Director's Report, City Council Report. Corey?
Yay, thank you. Part of the good news, I guess you could call it, is November, December are 1 meeting months for the commission. Do those holidays, always landing around your second meeting. So your next meeting is December 14th. The deadline for submittal of applications would be November 23rd, excuse me. And so I know that there are a couple of applications that are in the process of being prepared. They've submitted. We've talked about some different changes. Not sure whether they'll, because they involve a pretty intense level of looking at PDO amendments and so forth. So I'm not sure that they'll be ready for your December 14th, but it could possibly have one ready there in my view. So that's, and then we wait for others to come in. We've had some queries about potential permits for some other projects, but nothing's come in officially, so we could still salvage your meeting most likely and have a few items, because that's a limited window, and some people are trying to hustle to get something by the end of the year so that they feel comfortable doing investments in the spring. Then we kind of tip off until you start getting that thaw, and then everybody races in because it's construction time again.
Building season.
Yeah, so we're still preserving that for now, and I can coordinate with the chair if nothing fruits to an agenda. City council report, the landscaping changes, the additional landscaping changes we talked about were passed by the city council. And Pro Tem Hurst wanted to make sure that you received appreciation for your efforts in that, so. A little bit of hats off to, because she was a commissioner, so she kind of knows the things that you go through, so she wanted to make sure that you appreciated your work. Your goals, you can see they're winding down. Subdivision ordinance, we've had some additional amendments, so we're kind of in this fluid where we have past amendments that we've put in there, but now we have new amendments that we've got to add in, and we're still kind of waiting to finish that out. And Lisa has a ton on her plate. General plan, economic update, city manager had Jake, our RDA and our HR person submit another grant. He's feeling pretty comfortable that the grant could come in. I got some recent emails that says you need to sell it a little bit more to us, and so we'll see how that grant works out. So maybe we could go underway. There's been some talk down at the staff level that if we don't, we probably don't necessarily have to wait to do some general plan amendments, because there's some significant strategic areas that we could tackle until we get to a larger picture type plan. And so I've already started that process of what those amendments potentially would be if we're turned down on the grant for this following year. This following year, the grant money doesn't become available till July 1st. And so part of the discussion that I mentioned to the city council is planning can drive an election if you pick the wrong topic. South Main Street corridor plan is an example. And so do we not? There's a mixed feeling at the council. Some have said, we need to get some things done. So there's some support to start, but as you start into the campaign season, there might be some rethinking on what we're willing to tackle in the run-up to an election. This is what makes government slow, getting things done.
Remind me when the election takes place.
What's the primaries? August? There's runoffs?
Yeah, municipal elections are in odd-numbered years.
Yeah, so
I didn't hear what the question was.
So we're having an election next year, so he's just curious about what that is.
August and November. August primary if we have enough.
So if we start in July, you can see what
Yeah.
that does or doesn't set you up with, depending on,
Yeah. And the early voting has really changed campaigning. It's a lot more of a.
I can spin it as a positive, you go out, you've got some good ideas, you want to complete them, that's a great campaign format to go on to, and that you're planning for a vision of the city, and here's what you lay out and it could benefit you, but you could also say something that doesn't sit well in a campaign, and it doesn't matter what you try to do as damage control, you create it. So I don't know what's happened, but I do think that in spite of what we can do, we could strategically make some important edits to the general plan that are out. Why that's important, I come up 30 years in August, so I'm eligible for retirement. And I'm making plans and leaving the end of the year tentatively. Now with kids and all the drama that goes on with adult children, I don't know how that'll all play out.
Hold on, I thought the drama was supposed to stop when they were teenagers.
Yeah, well,
I was banking on it.
Well, not when they're teenagers, but when become adults.
Or, I mean, stop after they're teenagers.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
I thought so,
Doesn't stop.
till they get into their lives and then interesting things happen, so. I don't know, there's security in taking a career that you know really well and keep on going, and there's also the concept of reinventing, and part of my motivation is not because I'm not taken care of by Centerville and haven't enjoyed my career, but it's a heavy intensity conflict management career. And so,
Yeah.
do I want to invent myself why I can for another decade into something different, more of an advocation than a vocation? I don't know. So I don't know, but I think for me, I don't want to walk away and somebody comes on board and says, look at this general plan and what went on for 19 years. So I'd like to have a few of those creative moments and visionary moments that says, we started something, now carry it on. So
Yeah. Okay.
that's longer pitch than you wanted, but
Well, that's interesting information there, Corey. That's good. So, you don't have to answer this right now, Corey, but the tabled parking update that we sent to the city council at the beginning of the year, would either of the two parking modifications that we reviewed tonight have maybe benefited from that?
That's a great question. I think Councilmember Summerhays hit me up in an email watching the agenda, and I don't believe so. Looking at the tables and the changes, these were really unique situations.
Benefited or withheld. The only thing was, remember we put in that cap of the percentage? So on this Cook one, I don't know if they were,
Right.
I think we said you can't change the parking modification more than 30% or.
Yeah, there's something
So
like that.
his was more
Sure.
like a 50% parking modification tonight maybe, so that might have impacted. But I did do a revised version of that parking, taking out some of the more controversial issues, mainly the parking table, to try and at least just get these text amendments on the parking modifications and some other things like our drive aisles. So I am proposing to try and get that back before the council in December, before the end of the year, to see.
See where they're at.
So we'll,
I know there's mixed feelings at the council on that. Some of them want to go move forward and complete, the work was done and the time and effort was put in. But there's also some resistance of some members thinking, and I think this is what we have to go in and spend some time doing. There are some calculation changes that I think they feel are threatening a huge reduction, which I don't think really play themselves out. But there's a couple of strategic reductions that I think a couple of them are really don't want to do, particularly centered around office. And so I think, can we get with them and parse out the ones that are really conflicting with them and salvage, like Lisa said, a few others. My preliminary pokes behind the scene, for those who are struggling with it, are okay if it doesn't go fast, but others are feeling like some effort was put in and it's been presented and it was tabled by the council rather than denied. So let's make a decision.
Something that maybe a work session would be appropriate, so we can sit down and
I think that could be positive. I mean, what they asked for is for us to go out and start comparing and truth grounding everything. And
Yeah.
I just felt like, okay, if we could narrow down to what you want, ground truth, because the ITE manual, as you know, didn't cover everything. We had a parking study done and some recommendations and some comparables, and apparently that's not enough. And so the issue was, is how intensive is this ground truthing program intended to be?
Sure.
So maybe a work session could alleviate that a little bit.
Well, the way I think about it is, it almost feels like we're at an impasse here. Maybe they've got some differing views than we do. When it comes to, this is a different scenario, a different whatever, but maybe there's some similarities. Up at the state legislature, if the House and the Senate disagree on a particular bill, they might have a conference. and they're gonna get together and they're gonna hash out the differences and figure out if they can come to an agreement somewhere in the middle or not.
Right.
And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, whatever. And so I'm just wondering if maybe that might be
No,
something similar that we could do.
I like that idea because where I start, withdrawing and conflict is that this is not being driven by an applicant, it's not driven by the market, this is a city issue. And it's really hard for staff to be the lone person in an arm wrestle with the city council saying, no, you gotta do this. And then, well, I don't really wanna do it. No, you gotta do it. And it's just, a battleground. It's not a consensus building. And so I think you're proposing more of a consensus building. And I think that even just the parking modification changes, if we just salvage that section and abandon the counts, we're better off. I don't think it solves the flex space thing that has been my heartburn for a long time, but there's some things to salvage, and maybe there's, like you said, okay, we won't push that one, but these are really good things to hang our hat on.
Well, that's why I think that a trimmed down version would actually be way better than nothing. And I think that would be, I would welcome that for sure. And so that'd be good. But then also the counts, because as we talked about when in our discussions about it, retail, we've got some wide open retail parking lots that we probably don't need that much asphalt, right? And we could talk about that. But on the flip side of that, it seems like the flex space is in here at least every other month looking for a modification. I don't know, maybe I'm over exaggerating.
No, it is.
It feels like that.
It feels like that.
So, I just think that parking is something that I almost feel like we spend too much time on it here, and so maybe we could talk about that with the.
And I think that's a good thing to talk about, and maybe a little bit of, you've poured through a lot of your goals. It's taken nearly 2 years to get through some of them. So is that something where we can tackle a few more things? And I would make the pitch that even if we don't get the general plan to do a whole entire update in a big, huge, comprehensive, robust way, we shouldn't abandon the idea that there's some strategic things and visions inside of that plan that we could take advantage of and work it out with them and make those some of the goals.
Well, yeah, so again, I think, I welcome the idea of taking a limited version of parking modification amendments to the city council. I think that's great. And then, talk to Brandt or the mayor or whoever, but.
Both.
Okay, both. I think it would be kind of nice to be able to sit down and talk about some of this stuff face to face and see if we can find some common ground and resolve concerns or whatever.
Well, I'd be happy to take this request to the commission saying, look, we've accomplished a good portion of the goals. We want to do some more work. We ought to also have a discussion with the parking, so we need to have a little bit of powwow in a work session and see where we go from there. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I still think it would be nice, if we can finish this goal by the end of the year, at least get the ordinance that we prepared. And then, because I think the council will want some data when we sit down to analyze these counts, because their concern is, as Corey said, that, it really is going to change the status quo out there. And I think staff's perspective is, I'm not sure, but I also think that we're hearing from developers that our counts, like you said, for office and other things are very different than our neighbors. Now, I'm not, me, I always say, well, we're Centerville, but it does create this issue where, they've done their analysis and their counts, and then they come to Centerville and then they ask for the parking modification because we're so different.
Yeah.
And I think that we should have a good justification for why we want that much parking.
Sure. Yeah. Okay,
I'll do that. I'll send up a request.
that'd be great. Thanks.
That helps me, thank you. I sometimes feel like I'm lonely up there when they're disagreeing with the planner. And I'm like, well, we had a study done, we had this done, we had that done. And I think we shouldn't focus on the parking of unnecessary. Even the parking modification is trying to say, hey, if it's truly unnecessary, let's not require it.
Yeah.
That's that first clause up there, is we don't want to just do parking for the sake of parking.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's something that as a commission, we spend a lot of time talking about, reviewing, arguing sometimes,
Yeah.
whatever. Be nice. Okay, let's move on then. The last item on our agenda is to review and approve the minutes from our last meeting. We'll go through these pretty quickly. Does anybody have any suggested changes or comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? 5? Great. Who wants to make a motion?
I motion that the minutes, as reviewed, be accepted. Did I say that right?
Yeah, approved, accepted,
Approved.
good, yeah.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. All together, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, we are adjourned.